1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, my name is Christine O'Connor, and I'm a committee clerk at the City of Kingston.
And hi, my name is Iain Sullivan, and I'm also a committee clerk at the City of Kingston.
And
we're here to tell you more about advisory committees.
Hello, and welcome back to Tell Me More, the podcast that knows everyone, including City Council, needs some solid advice now and again. I'm your host, Autumn Hume, back for another season. In the past on the show, we have talked about how the Kingston community can become more involved in how the city works, including our public engagement work, customer experience department, and how to become a councillor or the mayor. And today, we're here to talk about another way to provide guidance to the city, and that's through the city's advisory committees. I won't bother with trying to explain what those are because I happen to have two experts on advisory committees in the room with me right now who can explain it so much better than I can. So a big welcome to both Christine and Iain. Hello, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
All right, let's jump in. So I want to start off with we've got two people here, so I want to start off with a quick round of introductions. Could you introduce yourself to the listeners and let us know what a committee clerk does?
For sure. So my name is Christine, and I've been working with the city in the city clerks department since July 2023. So I've been around for about 6 months now.
Yeah.
Fairly new. Iain, did you want to?
Yeah, so I'm Iain, and I've worked with the City of Kingston since October 2019, so for quite a long time now. But I started as a committee clerk in 2021 or 2021. So I have a bit more of experience in terms of having been to a lot of these committees before, but I think we're probably equally in terms of how we can explain what we do.
Yeah, we got the voice of experience and the fresh perspective.
Exactly, yes. So a committee clerk functions just almost like a city clerk as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we go to the meetings, we take the minutes, we provide procedure advice to members on the committee, both councillors and public members. We also make the agendas, and we are the ones that publish the official minutes of the meeting.
So kind of like the ones behind the scenes, making sure that these things actually function the way they're supposed to, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very significant. Okay. So we've got a sort of idea of what the role is. What advisory committees do you both work with? And if you could give me kind of a quick summary of what they do as well.
Yeah, so the advisory committees that I work with are the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Kingston Heritage Programs Committee.
Oh, okay.
So for the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee, the mandate is to advise council each year about the preparation, implementation, and effectiveness of its accessibility plan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then they also review site plans and drawings and provide advice to the manager of planning. Mm-hmm. And then they provide advice to council on the accessibility of buildings or structures owned or leased by council, as well as the purchase of goods or services through the city.
So the committees that I look after, the first one I wanted to talk about is the Kingston Heritage Properties Committee, that we usually just call Heritage Properties.
We have a lot.
Yeah, their mandate is primarily to deal with the physical heritage of the city of Kingston.
Right.
So there are a number of heritage districts, like the Sydenham district downtown, and a bunch of listed buildings as well. So those are listed under Part 4 and Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So it's their job to review the permits that come in or applications that come in for changes to buildings that are of a heritage character.
Right.
They also provide advice to council related to things around that kind of mandate. So things like the window policy, for example, and the stone policy, because we actually have policies related to historical windows and stonework.
So window policy would be like what kind of windows you can install in a
Yes.
heritage building? Okay.
Yes, because there are certain windows that can be built and used in certain heritage buildings.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So then the second one is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee. That's or EDI for short. That committee is fairly new. The City of Kingston started running that committee in 2021.
Okay, yeah.
And it is tasked with ensuring that the ideas and the things that the City of Kingston is proposing are being looked at through an EDI lens.
Right.
So that's a lot of the stuff that they actually do are more internal focused. So, for example, putting in products in bathrooms, for example,
Right.
or making sure that our reports take an EDI lens when they're being brought before council or a committee.
Right.
And so they provide some really, really good, I guess you could say, lived experience from a lot of things. It's a very diverse committee, and the ideas that come out of it are really, really interesting. The third one is the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee. I don't think that one needs much introduction. I think in this day and age, a lot of people are paying attention to something like the housing crisis and things like that.
Fairly descriptive name too.
Yes. So their big ask is to advise council and advise staff on the various housing projects, like for rent geared to income
Right.
and items like that being brought before council, and ideas about that kind of implementation. So things like where could we next put a rent geared for income building or things like that.
Right. Okay.
They also receive quarterly reports based on data around the unhoused population in the city, what services need to be ramped up, what things need to be improved, how the city can improve, where the city needs to improve, that kind of a thing.
Interesting.
Then there's one that doesn't meet fairly often, but it is a vital one. That is the Kingston Environmental Advisory Committee. Anybody that is familiar with the city of Kingston might have also known it as the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum. We recently renamed it, so we kind of just call it KEEF or KEEK for short.
Right.
So they meet to discuss matters related to the city's tackling climate change.
Right. Okay. So, like the climate leadership plan, or
Yeah, and the State of the Environment report is something that they have a big role in helping shape. They take elements away and kind of discuss the metrics that are being proposed by staff, and then help staff highlight and find new metrics to use, because staff don't always have all the answers.
right.
So they meet as required. So typically once or twice a year.
Okay.
The others meet more frequently. Like Heritage Properties, for example, meets every month.
Right.
And then one last one that I have, which is a little special, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but it is the Committee of Adjustment. So they deal with minor variances. They don't actually report to council. They're actually a separate little legislative committee. But I just wanted to...
Variances, you mean like shifts from our land use policy, or?
Yeah, so for example, if your front porch is going to be too close to the street.
Right,
So you
okay.
need a minor variance to deal with that.
Perfect.
So that's what they deal with, but they're a bit unique, so I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, that's fair. Christine.
Okay, maybe I'll start with the Kingston Heritage Programs Committee, since
Okay,
Iain
yeah.
started with Kingston Heritage Properties.
Sounds good.
So yeah, this committee addresses projects and opportunities related to Kingston's cultural heritage.
Oh,
So
okay.
for example, our museums, like the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum, the Pump House Steam Museum, Kingston City Hall as a heritage site. And then also the Kingston Civic Artifact Collection.
Oh.
So that's kind of their role, is dealing with those items. And then with the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee, which is another one of my committees, they ensure arts and culture are appropriately represented in city policies and programs, and that it serves the needs of residents.
Interesting. Okay.
And then my other advisory committee is the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee. For short form, we call it MAC. And they advise council on the accessibility of city-owned buildings, city-leased buildings, city services and goods, and then as well as the accessibility plan.
Very significant. Yeah. We actually, I think a season or two ago, we had a two-part episode where we talked with a member of the MAC committee and also a city staff member about how the recommendations from MAC were implemented in some of the projects related to the Grand Theater. Was really illuminating. So if you're listening, go back and listen to that episode. It's a good one. Okay, well, thank you for that rundown. It's interesting to see sort of the different themes and a lot of public interest stuff, which I guess makes sense given the nature of the committees. So is that the sum total of all of the advisory committees the city has, or are we missing out on a couple?
There are a few others, like I mentioned the Committee of Adjustment. That one is a bit unique, so we didn't really go into too much detail there. There's also the Appeals Committee. which meets monthly as required. It's a bit unique as well. There is also the Planning Advisory Committee, but that one isn't within the clerk's office wheelhouse, so we don't really deal with that one too much. But from that, that's all the advisory committees the city is currently running.
Okay, so we'll keep it focused on sort of the advisory committees that you guys are typically working with. And so I guess the common feature of an advisory committee, correct me if I'm wrong, but they typically include members of the public, right? Like that's the big thing about it? Okay. So before we dig in, could you tell me how an advisory committee would be different from, say, a non-advisory committee, or I guess they're called standing committees, or?
Sure. So an advisory committee is made up of members of the public and members of council, whereas standing committees are only made up of members of council.
Okay.
And so advisory committees serve to advise staff and council on certain matters that the city is doing, whereas a standing committee makes recommendations to council on items that staff bring before them. So the way that they work is similar, but their jobs are very different.
Yeah, okay. So the standing committee staff are bringing information to that committee. They're going to make a recommendation to council based on that.
Yes.
Whereas the advisory committee stuff is more things are being generated there and then coming out of that to staff and council.
Yeah. So often what staff will do is they'll bring an information report to the advisory committee and seek the feedback from the committee. And then they use that information to then make a report to council based off what the advisory committee has brought forward.
Awesome. Okay. That is something that I wanted to clear up because I don't work with the clerks or the legislative side very often, but I hear these things and I'm aware of many of the committees and some of the individual ones that I've dealt with and the work they do, but I wasn't quite sure the difference between the two. So thank you. So these committees, they offer community members the chance to directly advise council and staff on specific issues. It sounds like a pretty unique opportunity. How do you get on one? How do you join one?
So I'll start this one and then I'll hand it off to Christine for others. So I'm actually the clerk for the nominations committee.
Oh, okay.
So the nominations committee meets as required, usually at least once a year. And that is made up of members of council. And so what they do is we accept nominations, self-nominations from members of the public all year round. It's on the City of Kingston's website. You just fill out a small form and then it's sent to us. And then near the kind of end of the year, we do a big recruitment drive. So you might notice some advertisements around the city when we are doing that big drive. And we put all the people that put forward, we put their names on an agenda, we put their resumes, anything else that they wish to attach to highlight their experiences. And we send it off to the nominations committee, and the nominations committee makes the final choices on who gets to serve on the committee.
Okay.
And so then it's sent off to council.
Yeah, I think Iain covered it pretty comprehensively, but yeah, we do that once a year recruitment, but when needed, we can recruit, and we're always taking applications.
Interesting. So would the nominations committee then be a standing committee in that sense?
Yes, it's a standing committee of council.
Now I'm just hung up on these definitions. Okay, so you kind of answered the next question that I had, which was, does recruiting happen all year or at specific times? And it sounds like we kind of do our annual one towards the end of the year and then ad hoc as needed. That's kind of interesting. So I want to get more into the types of folks that end up on these committees. Are there specific skill sets? Are there soft skills? Are there personality types that are particularly useful for committee members? Does it depend on the committee?
Yeah, I think it would definitely depend on the committee if you're talking about a skill set. So for example, for the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee, one of the skills that they like you to have is reviewing site plans or having experience reviewing site plans. But it's not something that's necessary because it can be taught by, the more experienced committee members.
Right.
And then for appeals and committee of adjustment, I would say as well, a little bit more knowledge on minor variances or legal expertise is helpful.
Yeah.
But in terms of soft skills, I think what I've noticed is the ability to communicate effectively is really important, to be able to communicate your questions to staff, your opinions, to have a debate effectively. and then to the ability to work with others, which kind of goes into that debate
Yep.
piece, because sometimes you will be debating on contentious matters, and the ability to do that in an appropriate way.
Yeah, that is a real skill. That's a challenge. Yeah.
And I'd also say for some committees, staff and council are really looking for people with lived experience.
yeah,
So like with the Housing and Homelessness Committee, it is really, really vital that we have people who have experience with like housing precarity to be able to provide their knowledge and how it impacts them and how staff can help.
Right.
Same thing with EDI. People that are from all walks of life are needed on that committee because it's so vital that we have as many voices as possible talking about these issues.
It sounds so obvious when you say it like that, but it's very important. It would be very important to have that. After all, those are the groups of people that are going to be impacted by these policies. So you want to hear from them while you're crafting them, right?
Exactly.
It makes a lot of sense. So expanding a bit on the role the public plays on these committees, let's say I've applied for a committee, I've been approved by the nominations committee. What's next? What can committee members expect in terms of support in their role on the committee, or are they just kind of thrown in there on day one, like, here's your chair, go for it?
No, so I guess what's next is you would hear from Iain or I. We would contact you and provide you with some reading materials. But we also do a new training for new members,
Okay.
which is coming up for us at the end of the month. We will be training all of the new members on procedure and everything. So they won't be thrown into it. They'll have a great idea of what's expected of them and what they would have to do during a meeting.
That makes sense. That's good.
We also, when we do the emails, when we send people off, we have everybody in one email, and we encourage members to get to know each other, and to discuss one-on-one with each other. We don't want to we want to avoid having a quorum discussing something.
Right.
But we do encourage them to get to know one another, especially if it's a fully virtual meeting, like some of them are. It's best to, find out what the other people around the table are like. And then during the first meeting, we always set a little time aside to kind of provide some basic introductions. And then we kind of get into the meat of the first meeting beyond that.
That's kind of interesting because then it gives people a chance to get to know each other and build those relationships that they're going to be working with each other. So it's
Exactly.
good to understand that. You did bring up something that I hadn't thought about. So are our committees, are they virtual? Are they in person? Are they hybrid? Does it depend on the committee?
It depends on the committee.
Okay.
So, for example, the Heritage Properties Committee meets at 9:30 a.m. on the third Wednesday of every month in the council chamber. Whereas the Housing and Homelessness Committee and the MAC Committee, they meet virtually.
Okay.
Especially with MAC, we found it's the most
Accessible.
it's the most accessible way to do it. So, kind of outgrowing from the pandemic, but it's helped with some of the advisory committees to stay virtual, but they all have the option, if they so wish, to come back in person as well.
Yeah, I worked with the city's public engagement team as well, and that was very similar to the same sort of feedback we got as well, was that the virtual option was an accessibility feature. Some people preferred in person, and so we've done the odd hybrid thing, but it's very interesting how this feature that started out as an accessibility thing has now become standardized and more broadly used. It's kind of, not that there was a lot of good things that came out of the pandemic, but that might have been
Yeah.
an aluminum lining, I guess. So I want to talk a bit about some of the newer things that have been happening on the advisory committee side. So specifically, I'm wondering about the addition of the honorariums and youth reps. I want to maybe start with the youth reps because that seems pretty cool. It seems like a great idea to engage the community's future and bring the youth in. Yeah, want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know, Iain, maybe you have a better background on it, but
Well, for the youth thing, that came out of a motion from Councillor Hassan.
Okay.
And it's for members of the public who are under the age of 25. So we went with the UN definition of youth.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So several of the committees have them. So, for example, EDI committee, Heritage, the Heritage programs, not the properties, and KEEK and the EDI committee. And that's just to, again, bring more voices, more ideas and thoughts to the table.
Yeah, I had lots of ideas coming from sort of folks under 25 that you don't hear later on. It's a much less engaged demographic.
Exactly. And we were trying to target the committees that don't meet very early in the morning, or the ones that don't meet in the evening.
Right.
So, they can take especially if they're a high school student, for example, as we have one or two that are high school students or university students, they can take some time around their lunch hour to come to the meeting.
So if it's, if 25 is the cap, is there a minimum age?
16.
16. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's like working a job, kind of.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, okay, not every advisory committee has a youth rep. Is that something that you think might expand in the future, or we're just kind of seeing how it works right now and evaluating it?
My understanding is that it's kind of like a pilot project right now to
Right.
see how it works. Hopefully it will be a very successful opportunity, both to receive feedback from youth and also for the youth to have more experience with municipal government. So if it turns out to be successful, maybe we will see expansion, but I think at this point it's just kind of a project.
So I guess the obvious question then becomes, did we find youth reps?
Yes.
Good.
Every single one of the committees that we recruited for, because we recruited in November for these, we had lots of turnout, actually.
that's awesome.
It was very heartening to see.
That is good news. That is good news. Okay, so switching. So one more question about the youth then. Are their roles the same as the other members? Do they sort of do the same work, the same? Yeah.
Yep. And they are treated the exact same as every other member on the committee.
Right. Okay. Big responsibility at 17. Well, that sounds like a great opportunity for the youth. So if you're out there and you're looking for something to do, something to contribute to your community, seriously consider this, because there will be positions opening up. So the next one that I wanted to ask about was the honorariums. Again, sort of same questions. Is this is new? Is this all committees? How's that work?
So I was around when we kind of got that started, so I'll take this one, Christine. So back in 2022, the previous council passed a motion to start a pilot project for honorariums for the Housing and Homelessness Committee.
Oh, and
and
it's a good
so
one to start with.
yes, so it ran for a year, and then it came to the new council later last year to see what the appetite was to expand the pilot. So we expanded the pilot to other committees that have barriers to entry or potential barriers to entry. So the MAC committee and EDI committee are now receiving the honoraria. And so it's based on attendance to the meeting. So it's $100 per attendance of the meeting. And it's up to the individual member to choose whether or not they want to. So if they feel that it would help them to participate in the meeting and to reduce those barriers, then absolutely we encourage the members to take the honorarium.
That's fantastic. That sounds like something that might have come out of, say, an EDI lens applied to how we do committees.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so we are seeing the results of this come through. Has it? Have you noticed, like, has there been uptake with it? Has it helped folks overcome barriers to be able to take part in committees?
Well, I can't give exact numbers or anything like that, but I can say several members of the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee did take it during the earlier pilot in 2022 to 2023. And I believe several of the members of EDI and MAC are interested, but those committees have not yet met with the new honorarium in place.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, we're not asking nothing from people when they join a committee. It's a real commitment. And then, when you factor in barriers that people might experience trying to get to them, it seems like a very good thing to do to pay people for their time. So you talked a bit about how it came about. Sort of similar question regarding the youth, though. Is this something that might expand in the future? I guess it already has expanded. Is it still in the pilot phase?
Yes, so council is still treating it as a pilot. So we will be reporting back near the end of 2024 based on the uptake for the committees that now receive it. And from there, we will see if council wants to expand it to other committees. Right. So it could expand if the uptake is high, or it could stay at the committees that have just the highest need.
That makes sense. I could see it benefiting. That there might be some people who are considering taking part or considering applying, but that lack of, can I contribute all these hours for free during the week?
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, that's sort of everything that I wanted to cover off. I wanted to ask if there was anything else you wanted to add or reiterate before we wrap up.
I would just say that, the more people that we get applying to these committees, the better. Because, it makes the nominations committee meeting more interesting to see the amount of people that are applying, and it makes the committees themselves more interesting because then we get a broader range of ideas and thoughts and experiences, and I think that always produces better work in the end.
Okay, so if you've applied for a committee in the past and weren't selected, does that stay on file, or do we encourage you to reapply?
So there's two answers to that question. So if you became a member of, if you applied before and you received a notice that you were part of a reserve pool, that means that for the next several years you are on the reserve pool. So if a member resigns from the committee, from a specific committee, you're then just automatically appointed by council.
Right.
So you get first dibs, kind of a deal, coming back.
Pre-qualified.
Exactly. So then we don't have to go out and recruit all the time. So several of the committees actually have decent reserve pools of about like 5 to 6 people.
Oh, that's awesome.
Alternatively, if you were not selected by the nominations committee to be in a reserve pool or on a committee, we do keep your application on file, but we do request that members of the public do resubmit one at the beginning of a kind of big ramp up, because you might want to update your resume, or you've now graduated university, so you want to highlight that, for example.
Bring some new skill sets to the table. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, anything else from you?
No, I guess I would just reiterate what Iain said. It's not just EDI and some of those committees that you would think are obvious that we need a diversity of personalities and life experiences, but I've seen it on all of the committees. Like he said, it makes them more interesting, but it also is important for feedback to staff. So thank you to everybody who considers it.
No problem. Thank you guys for taking the time today. This has been really illuminating for me. And to all of you out there listening, sitting on an advisory committee probably won't be everybody's cup of tea, but for those of you who are interested, you really should check out the city's news releases and advertising for future application opportunities. Check out the committee page and submit your application. This is one of those incredible chances really to contribute through a collective effort towards the direction that council and the city are going on some really important issues. And if you're under 25, we see you and we value your feedback too. If you have any questions, please reach out through the city's contact webpage at any time, and some folks from the clerk's office will get back to you with some details. And as always, want to remind listeners to check out our backlog if you haven't, and please submit ideas for future episodes if you have any by emailing podcasts@cityofkingston.ca. Stay well, everyone.